Hi, welcome to Steve's Wood Cave. In this video I'm going to show you my preferred way of cutting blind dovetails. There are of course many ways of, several ways of cutting blind dovetails on the rat, but this is my preferred way, and it requires just one cutter, the dovetail cutter, and no straight bits. When you cut through dovetails, you cut the tails normally with the dovetail bit, and you cut the pins with a straight bit. But with this technique for blind dovetails, I'm going to show you how to cut the pin board, which actually creates sockets, and basically the sockets will be cut with the dovetail bit. This is the one that I've made for this video. It comes apart quite nicely. You can see the sockets in the drawer front. This is the drawer front. This is the drawer side in walnut, and that plugs straight into there, just like that. It comes out perfectly 90 degrees and ready for gluing. For doing blind dovetails, we however need to use something called a mitre box. This is the mitre box here. It's screwed and attached to this cutter position vise. The mitre box should come with your rat, but if not, it's fairly easy to make. It's simply 2 pieces of MDF. There may even be a template somewhere online, I don't know. But if you've got any questions about the mitre box, please put them in the comments below. I'll get back to you. But yeah, you should get one with your rat. If not, you can actually buy one from WoodRat themselves. So we need the mitre box because when we cut, for this technique, normally when you cut the pins on a through dovetail, the pin board goes into the cutter position vertically. But because we're just using a dovetail bit to cut the sockets, we need to place the drawer front to cut the sockets into in the horizontal position like this. And the only way to hold it is to put these MDF cheeks in so that it can be held in the horizontal position like this. And just tighten it up. Of course, you want to make sure it's hitting the underside of the router plate, so you can bring that in, push it right up, tighten it up. So now we've got that in that position where you can see the sockets there. So basically the dovetail bit will, if you imagine the router is coming across here, it will be coming into that to cut the socket. So you come in, come out, move it along, come in, come out, and so on, until you've made the socket. Also, we will not need the spirals, the cam spirals, for this. I've shown how to use the cam spirals to make the pin board for through dovetails in a previous video, but for this we don't need those at all. We only need this these straight aluminium guide rails, so fit those if they're not already on your WoodRat. We also need to make a cutter profile template in a piece of offcut, and that's it. So let's see how to make this. This is just an example of a socket for a blind dovetail. So this would be the side face of your drawer, this would be the inside of your drawer, and we use the bit to basically cut everything out. One thing to note is that because you've got that left hand piece of MDF in this jaw, that means your marker position is going to be out, so you need to make up either with another piece of MDF. I didn't have a piece, this is about 15.1 millimeters or so. I didn't have another piece of MDF, so I just made up a piece of wood and machined it until it was the same thickness as this, and then that, my mitre box spacer, goes in, and I just put it in there with in the marker position. So whenever I put something in the marker position, I have to have this mitre box spacer. Just something you've got to remember. So anyway, I'll fit that now, and you can see that in fast motion. So those tabs slide into the slot. There's a couple of screws to add. Okay, so now you can see the mitre box in here. Also, if you've got the spacer plate fitted between the router plate and the top of the WoodRat body, you need to remove that, because otherwise when you put your workpiece in these jaws, it won't be gripped if it's up here. You can see there's only about a millimetre that this will grab this with, so I need to remove this MDF spacer. What we have to do first is do the cutter profile template, and even if you've cut one of these before for a previous job, you need to cut a new one. So any off-cut thin piece of wood, place it in the mitre box, but you're going to put it in vertically as you would normally. So wind this until you can put it up against the top of this thing, and just adjust the nut here. Make sure that the left hand ones are done up as well. And also make sure the piece of wood is held firmly at the top and bottom of the mitre box. Okay, I've got the cutter profile template blank in the cutter position in the mitre box, and I routed the top off so it's nice and square, pushed it back up, retightened it in the mitre box, zeroed the base of the dovetail bit on the top of the end grain of the this offcut. So I'm going to set this depth here is going to be about 13 millimeters. The thickness of my draw front is about 18.5, so that leaves about 5 millimeters of wood to the front. This is a 13 millimeter drill bit or thereabouts, 12.9. I'll just use that in there. You can obviously set your drawers to whatever you want, but this is what I'm doing. And it's just a demonstration. So that's that. So now I need to plunge it, cut the profile template nice and carefully, because we're using about about half an inch of 13 millimeters of dovetail bit coming through. The main thing to do, if you haven't seen how to do a cutter profile template, don't touch the handle, because you don't want that sliding rail to move. So there's my cutter profile template. Using the mitre box space, that has to go in the marker position as well. Keep the same face of the cutter profile template facing outwards, and just feel until it's flush. Tighten it up. I'll zoom the camera in now, and then you can see what I'm doing at the marker position. Okay, so I'm going to use this Ashley Isles chisel, which is exactly 12 millimeters. It has a rounded profile. It's a dovetail chisel, so it doesn't have the bevels, and this can fit right into the base of this dovetail slot without damaging the actual dovetail bit. I'm going to keep it flush to the surface of the rat body, and then you're going to draw on either side of it. And that will create two straight lines either side of your cutter centre line. Slide it out carefully. So hopefully now you can see, because we've got this spacer block in here, cutter centre line is lined up with the centre of the profile that we've just cut of the router bit. So now we've got those lines, that will come in useful later on. So I've got to make two half pins or sockets. I'm just using this to reference off this side edge of the measuring jig. I can lay my ruler there. And I've worked out that because half the diameter of my dovetail bit is 6 millimeters, I need to make a line 2 millimeters in. That'll give me 2 millimeters more than the 6 millimeters. So it should give me a bottom shelf of about 8 millimeters. Then we've got half of the 67, which is 33.5. About there. project these across towards the rat body. You can obviously design your drawers however you wish. That's the beauty of the measuring jig. You can decide based on a drawing wherever you want to put the centre of the cutter. So now when I line up this measuring jig here with this first 2mm line, that means I'll get 2mm more than half the diameter of the widest part of the dovetail bit. A little over half a pin. So now with my drawer side and with my first mark at 2mm on the measuring jig, I'm going to cut the 2 half sockets on the tailboard. So this now goes in the cutter position. So what I'm going to do is cut the 2 half pins by not touching the handle, turning the workpiece around. That means that it'll make it completely symmetrical. We'll cut the first one first. Just check, because I think my depth stopper's gone, so that was going to be the diameter of this 13mm bit. Now we've cut the 2 half pins, or half sockets I should say, in the tailboard, or the drawer side, and the centre. So that's complete. We use this as a guide in the marker position. We'll take the measuring jig out and I'll show you the next steps now to cut the drawer front. So what you need to do now is take your tailboard, set the depth on your marking gauge to the thickness of the board, because that thickness there is the depth of cut into the side of into the drawer front. That surface needs to be flush with that surface. So we need to go to the thickness of that and mark a line on the inside face. My face mark is on the outside of my drawer front, so this is the inside edge. That's the end that I'm going to cut the sockets into, the pin sockets. So I need to set that to the thickness of my walnut board and then mark across the inside edge. If you want the drawer side to sit proud of the side edge of the drawer front, so you can plane it down afterwards, you can obviously set this to something which is slightly shallower than the thickness of the board, so that it protrudes, and then you can clean it up afterwards. That's my drawer front. That's the end that I'm going to cut the dovetails into. So I'm going to reference off that and just mark this inside edge with the marking gauge. We need this line because we want to know how far in we're going to cut the sockets. Okay, so I've got a very faint line there. The good thing about using the marking gauge is it gives you a very, very narrow line to which you can accurately set your router bit. So now you want to take your drawer front, the side which is the inside surface of your drawer, which you've scribed your line on, goes up against the router plate. Place it in the cutter position in the mitre box, fully horizontally. Just wind it along so you can butt it up against the front face of the rat and then tighten it up. Just one little thing you might need to check is where the MDF outer surface of this left hand mitre box jaw fits against the aluminium vice jaw. You want to make sure that there's no gap between the aluminium and the MDF. I found that if you squeeze this too tight, this top left wing nut too tight, it will push the MDF away from the aluminium. So you just want to be careful of that and make sure that it's pretty much, you can't get a scalpel in between the two. So I'll just wind this out so you can see what it looks like. So there's my board held in the mitre box horizontally, butted right up against this front face of the WoodRat body, and no gap between the top surface and the underside of the router plate. So now take the measuring jig out, remembering to put the mitre box spacer in again. We set this up on here and we protrude the end grain on the top of the tail, protrude it up by about 1/2 millimetre or so. And the reason for that is that you want to get your square on that. You might have to fiddle with it a little bit. You don't want it too far down, you certainly don't want it flush, you want it sticking above the top surface by about 1/2 millimetre. So now what we want to do, and I'll show you close up in a second, we're going to rotate the bit until the widest part of the base of the dovetail bit is pointing towards you. You're going to lower that onto the top of the drawer front, and then we're going to position it back to front so that that front tip of the router bit just touches the line that we've scribed on the drawer front. Okay, so if I can get my pencil in here and show you, the router bit, this front cutting edge is pointing towards me, and you can hopefully just see the scribed line on the inside face of the ash board, which is the inside face of the drawer front I should say. So what I'm doing here is I'm just pushing the router backwards and forwards until it hits that line. Just give it a little tap, make sure the bit is right on top of the wood. So that looks about right to me. So now I'm going to set the hex key in the centre plate, and that will then prevent the router from coming forward beyond that line. So I think the best thing to do is put the hex key in through the centre plate at the front where the button is, then put the centre plate in, tighten up the button. Right, that can't move. Now we can adjust that to the front here, and hopefully there's a bit of the hex body left. Just check that your bit hasn't moved on the line. I think that's roughly right. So as I bring that in now, the hex key acts as a stop at the front of the router body. Okay, so we've got the stop set with this, using the centre plate. We've set the bit to touch the line. We now need to ensure this is the tailboard is sitting 1/2 millimetre above the top surface of the rat body. So what we're going to do first is we're going to set the centre of the tail with the cutter centre line. So that will take out a lot of the waste in the socket that we're going to cut. So basically we're cutting a socket the size of each of these tails, and the bits of wood that will remain on the board over there will be these half pins and this middle pin. So set the height before you cut the drawer front or the sockets to the thickness of your bit that you use to set the height of the tail, because that's how much what your depth of cut should be. When you do this first cut, you're cutting into the end grain, so go very slow, very carefully, because I'm using a steel bit, and if you're using tungsten carbide bits then you'll be fine. With these HSS ones you need to be a little bit careful, although this one is a slightly larger one, so it's quite robust. Now we need to move the tailboard, and you need a small square like this sterling square, which has a very, very narrow point. If you haven't got one, then I guess you could just find the smallest square you've possibly got and angle it slightly. But I'll show you close up here so you can see how I'm aligning these straight pencil marks that we put on here earlier, how we're going to align them with the tails. Because now we've cut that centre cut, we now need to take out a portion either side of that cut that we've just made, and that will make the first socket. So using my square, I'm going to align it with that right hand edge, this right hand edge of this tail, which is protruding above the top face by about 1/2 millimetre. I'm going to move this along with my square on until it just covers that right hand straight line. Just let it peep out and then just cover it. That should enable us to cut the right hand side. And now what we've got to do is depth the router bit and make a cut. We're then going to do the same on this side. I'm going to bring this along until it just covers that left hand line and make the second cut. Then we're going to do exactly the same for this right hand tail. We're going to do a cut in the middle, and then we're going to line the right hand edge of the tail with the right hand line and the left hand edge of the tail with the left hand line, and so that it's just covering the line. That's very important. So let me just set that right hand one back again and we'll make the cut. So rather than show you that close up again in every step, I think I've described it already. So I'm just going to make all the cuts now, and then hopefully we'll take it out and it will fit. Okay, that's the left hand socket done. I just wanted to mention that if you were making lots of drawers, then you would put in your drawer fronts one after the other and do the same. Obviously you want to do one on the other, put two sockets on the other end. So you take the board out, rotate it around and do the next one at the settings that you've got on the marker position. So you just keep putting them in. Same for making the drawer sides. When you're doing the tails, same with through dovetails, you can put several of them all stacked up, especially if you're using this mitre box. You can stack them up and pull all the way through and cut several boards at the same time. So that's another thing that you can do, and that will speed up the whole process. So whilst it might look a bit laborious, it's not in reality when you're doing it in production. Anyway, I'm going to cut the centre of the right hand tail now, well not the tail but the socket for the tail, and then do the two sides. Okay, so that's the sockets done, but what you can notice is that there is a use a scalpel. So from your scribed line you've probably got a couple of millimeters left here, and that means that we either need to chisel that out back to the line by hand, which you can do, but it's a bit of a pain, or what you can do is take your tailboard out and put it back in the cutter position, and we can take that difference and measure it with a set of digital vernier calipers or calipers, and then take the equivalent off the back edge of the tails. So what I mean by that is you take that measurement, which is I think about 2 millimeters, mark it off 2 millimeters across here with your marking gauge, put it back in the vertical position in the cutter position, and then just run the cutter along the back edge. So then that should take out like a rebate from the back of the tail, and the tail board will then fit in. Let's see if this fits. Yep, just. So you can see it's quite a snug fit. There's the reason why it won't go in. Well, two reasons: it's quite snug, and secondly, all that wood hasn't been removed in there. So what I'll do is I'll now cut the back of the tailboard. So I'm just reset my marking gauge. That's the outside of my drawer, so I want to mark it from the inside face, and that's set to the difference that I showed you, which is about, turns out it's about 2.5 millimeters. Anyway, the thing is you'll not see this side of the tailboard, so hopefully you can just see that faint line. So what I'm going to do is set it back in the cutter position with this inside face of the drawer side against the body of the rat, and my face side facing me. So what I'm going to do is depth the bit to the same depth as the tails, and then we're going to cut in until the cutter hits that line that it's touching at the moment. If we only run the router bit across at that distance, then it won't take enough wood off the back and the rebate won't be big enough, and therefore the tails won't sit all the way into the sockets. So what we're going to do is plunge and then just pull the router bit straight in until that line is being cut. Once you've pulled the bit into the back of the tail up to your line, then you need to add the star knob in this left hand slot in the router plate. That will prevent it going backwards and forwards. And now from this position I can continue, it's already pulled into that cut. From that I can go all the way out and then come back again. So although we've cut this dovetail shaped rebate in the back of this, all of these back corners of each of the tails just needs chiselling off, or rounding off with a rasp. It won't fit until you do that. This is a very fine rasp. You can use a file, just chisel it off. But just round those edges, because if you don't round them right to the base, it's not going to go in. And you may not succeed at your first attempt, so just keep going until you've rounded it off enough. You should eventually get there. So a moment of truth. Tap with the mallet. Okay, so there you go. It's sitting just proud of the end face. I can plane that off now, glue that up. There's no gap showing inside now. And flush both sides. So yeah, not too bad. Happy with that. So there you go. That's blind dovetails on the WoodRat. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you've got any comments or questions, put them in the under the description below. I'll get back to you. I think it's turned out really well. There you go, beautiful, nicely cut, and fits in there nice and snug. No worries. Thanks for watching. See you again. Thanks for watching, and if you like what you see here and you're new to this channel, please subscribe for more updates as they come available. Otherwise you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter or Pinterest, so that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. See you again.